the
All
hospice
right,
and
palliative. So we are live now. As my friend Dan is teaching me how to say the word palliative. Yes, you are here on Friday, the 15th at Litvak Leadership Live, and we are talking to my shocking one of my oldest friends, one of my good friends that I haven't spoken to in years, the Rabbi Dan Rabishaw, DD, MBA. He has more titles than most of my friends. And Dan and I, when we ran around it together, we were just reminiscing about how many of our friends are now rabbis or are in Jewish education or are in ministry of some sort like I have done. So hello, Dan. How are you?
I am good, Sean. It is so good to be with you and to be here to have this conversation. Hi, Sari.
You may know Sari. Sari's my cousin from Skokie.
I know. She said cousin. She says hi, cuz.
Well, there you go.
Anyway, I'm thrilled to be here and to share with your folks a little bit about what I do and how I contribute to the world.
Yeah. So Dan works in hospice and say the word
palliative.
Palliative. Doesn't look like that
I'll
to me.
Explain it. I'll explain the difference. Okay.
But and hospice and palliative care. But he began as a straight rabbi, straight rope, what I would, running.
Be careful how you say words like that, but yes, I
know you got to be careful nowadays, but in a congregation. So Dan, why don't I throw the floor over to you? Give everyone a little bit of the flavor of your journey, and then we'll get into conversation.
Okay. So I was ordained in 94, many years ago, 26, it'll be 27 years ago, and in Cincinnati, Ohio, after a 5-year graduate program where I lived in Israel and then lived in Cincinnati and traveled around the country. I was a congregational rabbi in Cincinnati, Ohio for a 1,000-family congregation. I was what I lovingly refer to as the ass rabbi, because assistant or associate, I was the ass. It didn't matter. If you wanted to talk to the rabbi, you'd get the senior rabbi. If you wanted a rabbi, you'd get me. And I was okay with that. And from Cincinnati, I moved to Houston, where I was an associate rabbi, the number 2 rabbi of a senior staff of 5 clergy members. We had a lot of rabbis, rabbi educator, cantor, senior rabbi, and I did that for a number of years. And then I moved to Memphis, Tennessee to help a congregation go through a transition. And I was in Memphis for 3 years. It was a situation where my friend was a senior rabbi, and he was taking over for the longtime senior. And that whenever you have any organization that goes from a long-time leadership model to a new leadership model, that's always a danger point, potential boom. And we helped him get through that. And then I went to work for an organization called the Union for Reform Judaism, which also used to be known as the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. It is an umbrella organization for the liberal end of the Reform Jewish, or for the Reform Jewish synagogue. So I oversaw a region of 60 synagogues in 5 states.
So that was the UAHC, but with a new name.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, think about an organizing structure for synagogues, a synod, if you will, a parish, but not really a parish, more of a diocese kind of a situation. But we didn't have the cool titles and we didn't have the cool clothing. So I did that for a number of years and started an MBA program in the context of that, because I was doing congregational leadership and congregational management consulting. And then the economy hit, and then the market tanked in 2008 when we had all of those challenges. And one of the biggest hits when the market dropped is that a lot of the organizations I worked for and with lost really their discretionary. And so a lot of people lost money, so they were not able to pay the synagogues. Synagogues lost money, so they were not able to pay the union, and the union lost money, so they had to lay off a bunch of their staff, and including their entire regional structure. And I was a part of that layoff process, which was really painful. So I worked for a year as an interim rabbi and helped a small congregation that's here in the Chicago area to close shop, longtime congregation. And we did that with, with a sense of humility and structure and saying goodbye. And then I finished up my master's in business, took a year off, hung out with my kids, and really tried to better my own self for a year. And then I said, I'm going to try hospice for 2 years, and I'll go and I'll be a hospice chaplain because I missed being with people. I'd always been attracted to the more medical end of the world and that scientific brain part of mine that really clicks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 10 years ago. So in that time, I've been a manager of a team, what we call a team director. And I oversaw a team of probably about 18 people who oversaw the care of about 100 patients. And then it just ended up a situation where we were going through some changes at the company, and I didn't really particularly care for the direction of the management. So I opted to go back and be a chaplain, and now I'm back in my role as chaplain. But now it's great because now I have the ability to lead without some of the responsibilities of being a manager. And that really kind of frees me up to do a lot of things like this.
So how has all of that prepared you for working with people that are, I guess I'm going to use the term chronically ill, long-term ill?
I'm going to go further than that. They're dying. These are not people who have chronic illness.
Okay.
These are people who are dying.
Okay.
Hospice itself, just as, and was learning for me, hospice means that you have 6 months or less to live if left untreated for a primary diagnosis. So let's say you have a very slow growing cancer like thyroid cancer. That's probably not going to put you on hospice unless it's really, really the end and you've already had other issues. But if you have something like pancreatic cancer, which can be more aggressive,
mm-hmm.
They might say that, listen, if you decide to opt out of chemo, then you're not going to live very long. And at that point, that's when we bring people into our care. And so in a sense, it's kind of strange, but the skill set around it may have changed, the specifics, but my strength has always been my interaction with others. People are my specialty. My toolbox is how I deal with folks. And so whether you're helping a family navigate their 13-year-old daughter's bat mitzvah through all of the intricacies that entails, or you are helping a family cope with the terminal reality of their loved one, or even helping that loved one, right, deal with dying. They're the same skills: empathy, listening, high emotional intelligence, no judgment, understanding that different people process information in different ways. So in a sense, what I do is very consistent, even though it sounds very, very different.
So how, as I was sharing with you before we came on the air, as I was putting together the promotional thumbnail last night, I was just overwhelmed with emotion over what you do. And how, obviously, I am not dealing with people who are dying every single day, but thinking about what you do as I was trying to find the words to promote today, it just really hit me. How do you go to work and have a good day? Let's just start there. What is a good day at work?
Okay, so this is going to sound strange. 90% of the time I do okay. 90% of the time it's okay, because while I am involved with people at a level that most people aren't involved, right? These aren't my loved ones.
Okay.
Right. It's like, how do you go into, if you're an attorney and you're a divorce attorney, how do you go into a war between an ex-husband and an ex-wife and not get sucked in? Well, because it's not your marriage.
Right.
Because from a mental health perspective, I understand boundaries and I understand what my own issues are so that I don't let myself get sucked into that. That's number one. So that's a huge part. And so I'm there to help. If I am sucked into the emotional side, then I can't be effective to help the others. So what does a good week look like? This past week was actually a good week, even though it was a very shitty week. I'll be very honest. I had a personal loss, a close friend I had explained to you earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the room this week when 3 people took their last breath, and that is heavy. And to say that it didn't affect me would be lying. But for 2 of them, one of them was 100 years old. He was a Japanese gentleman who was interred in camps in World War II in the United States. So he had that whole breadth of experience. So, and talking to him, by the way, he died of heart issues. So he was wide awake really until probably the day before he died. So he and I were having conversations on Tuesday, and he died on Wednesday. But his story was tremendously uplifting, despite all of the challenges that this gentleman faced due to the color of his skin and the shape of his eyes and his ancestry. He was born in the United States, but his whole life was colored by that. And despite that, he was successful in his business. He had a family. He was well loved. He fought for the United States and Korea. So, yes, the death part is very difficult, but if I'm focusing on the death only, then I'm only doing part of my role.
Okay.
I focus on life, right? So I'm here to help them live, whether that's an hour, a day, a year. Does that make sense? One of the other women who died was the end of a very long illness. She was young, but she'd been suffering for 40 years. So, that came as a blessing.
So how do you encourage people? We always talk about, encouraging your team and getting your team to look to the future. So how are you in your role encouraging individuals who know death is imminent? Because if you're saying hospice is less than 6 months over the course of someone's life, that if someone told me I was going to be dead within 6 months, that would be imminent to me.
You have to be careful, because we say 6 months. That's a government definition.
Okay.
That's an actuarial definition. So, I mean, it could be 6. They could say 6 months. It could be a year. It could be 3 years. We don't know. So that's number one, is we just don't know.
But it's, I know death is coming for me someday. Okay. But I don't think it's in 6 months, 3 years, whatever. So how do you encourage these folks, and what do you encourage them to?
Well, encourage perhaps is a word that I don't know that I'd use. What I would say is I help them articulate what's going on in them. There's plenty of books out there on how to have difficult conversations, right? How do you have a difficult conversation with someone who doesn't want to have a conversation, or where the stakes are high and the potential emotional outlet is potentially high. So how do I have those conversations? Again, number one, I'm emotionally grounded. I'm not doing my own work in that space. That's key for anybody. And I will tell you, you who does ministry, if you go into a space and you're working out your own issues, then you're doing a disservice to the people who you're trying to minister to. And that's an important thing. So for me, it's just a matter of allowing them to talk and saying, are you afraid? What are your fears? What are you proud of in your life? How do you want people to remember you? Sometimes it's me having the conversation about, do you really want us to do everything? And let me explain what that means at the end of life. And so I have the do not resuscitate order conversation, or have the conversation with a loved one, that it's okay to say goodbye to your dad. I know you're going to miss him, but you got to say goodbye to release him so that he can feel it's okay to die. I mean, that one of our mottos is to celebrate life and offer hope. So we celebrate people's lives and we offer hope. And sometimes hope isn't that I'm going to get up and walk away from this bed. Sometimes hope is, my sister's going to die a quiet death, and she's going to die in her sleep, and she'll have an opportunity to wake up maybe a day before. We always shoot for something we call the perfect end of life experience, which may sound very strange to many people. But really, that means I'm dying in the way that I want to die, under my own terms, in a place I'm comfortable. So some people don't want to die at home. We do our best to make sure that they're not at home, although sometimes we can't control that. We really work hard to make sure that people's physical pain is in check, that their emotional pain is in check, that their spiritual pain is in check, and then we work with their families. So, as I said, it's not like I'm offering encouragement, like go team, but I am trying to be there as a non-anxious presence.
Sure.
At a time when most people get very anxious, and actually, one of the things that I'm known, I'll get to that, Eric, I promise. That's a great question. I lost my train of thought. This is the problem with ADD. But the notion that we're there to help them, and that
Right.
makes a big difference.
Well,
So Eric, go ahead, Sean.
Sounds like you're there. You are terrible. Maybe this is bad, but you're kind of like a tour guide facilitator to help them get to where they're supposed to be going. So here, go on with Eric's answering Eric's question.
So, and I think this actually kind of flows. Do I take solace in knowing that people may go to heaven? You know what? I'm not worried about that, because I believe that unless someone's done something terrible, that they're going to be in eternity. And I'll let you define eternity as you choose. As an interfaith chaplain, I don't assume to know where people are going. I can't. I don't know what their own belief set is. I do work hard at that, but some people don't believe they're going to heaven. Some people believe they're going to the ground, and that's it. But they're okay with that, because that's where they believe their life has led. There are those who believe that there is not a heaven per se, like a parallel universe in Star Trek, but heaven is when you're kept alive in memory. So I do my best to share people's stories. That's one of the ways that I kind of manage my own stuff. But again, my job is to help them get from point A to point B. And if point A is where I am today and point B is where I'm going, then my job is to help them get from where they are today to where they're going. And sometimes that means just, we're going to get through this next 45-minute visit. Sometimes that means I'm going to help you relieve yourself of some guilt or of some long-held concern you have regarding a relationship that may prevent you from dying comfortably. So my focus is right here. My faith is out here. Right. My focus in those moments of being one person who is there to be with another person, I'm focused on this. I'm focused on what happened here.
So how do you think this focus, okay, let's take it outside of hospice and palliative.
Palliative
care. Let's take it outside of hospice and palliative care.
Just say hospice, but go ahead.
Okay. Let's take it outside of hospice. How do you think that this focus can be transferred into helping people in their leadership skills?
First of all, I think that what I do is I lead. Everything I do is leading. I may not have a congregation anymore. So I think good leaders do a few things. I think good leaders have a sense on where they want to be. I think good leaders have a sense on where they were. But I think good leaders are there to help other people develop strength and help facilitate other people's growth and movement. I cannot control what was. I cannot control what will be. but I can control where I am in time and in space. So from a leadership perspective, I work with the team, right? And what's interesting about hospice is that the nurses tend to be really young, because honestly, it's grueling, and the younger nurses tend to hold on, and the older nurses, interestingly, are also young at heart. So all of us who work in this environment, I'm in my mid-50s, but when I tell people that who I work with, they're like, "Oh my God, Dan, I never would have put that to you." We tend to operate in a younger frame. So,
Right.
so I look at my team members as my congregation, if you will. Right?
Okay.
They're my work group that I'm there to help. And so if I focus on what's between these two things, then I'm not worrying about what I'm dealing with. I'm focusing on them. Right? If I focus and I talk to a person one-on-one, then I'm able to listen to them and to put them in touch with either resources that they already have, perhaps resources they don't have, perhaps advice, or perhaps it's just the act of listening, which most people don't do.
No.
So, there's different leadership styles. I would say overall, my leadership style tends to be one that in Hebrew we refer to as tzimtzum. And that literally means there's a story about God before the creation of the world. The world was all God. And this is rabbinic text. This is rabbinic teaching that goes back to, I would say, 3rd, 4th century of this era. That before the world was created, God was ever present, and in order for the world to be created, God literally had to contract himself in order to make room for the world.
Oh, that's so cool.
So the world couldn't exist unless God took a step back. That's how I view it. And then there's a whole host of other things that go along with it that kind of extend. But the general notion of tzimtzum, which literally means to contract, that's how I view my role. My role is to give people space to grow, to take my ego out of it, which we also see a lot of people have a great deal of difficulty doing. Because for a lot of people, leadership is about their own ego needs,
Yes.
which is a different issue. I also distinguish between leadership and management. Leadership is forward thinking. Leadership is helping people envision the what's and the how's and the potential and what might be. The management piece is helping people figure out, okay, what am I doing now? Right? It's the difference between, just to kind of give you a sense, and this was actually the subject of my rabbinic dissertation, the challenge between trying to manage my world that I live in by carrying 1, 2
You don't have a third one. Oh, and a tablet. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm talking to you from a computer, and I got another computer, right? So that's management. But leadership is really about contemplating the bigger issues, like about life and death, or about what am I doing in this world, or what is my purpose. So
where do you go for inspiration?
I read a ton, and I get inspiration from my patients, honestly, and from the people I work with. I'm constantly inspired. There's another rabbinic teaching, which is, who is the person who is wise? It's the one who learns from all. So, I'm a rabbi. I'm Jewish. But I will tell you, some of my most profound learnings in life and death have been from Zoroastrians, from Christians, from Catholics, from people of faiths that I didn't even know about before I met them, from Wiccans. I mean, all of these things that are so foreign to what my existence is, you can learn a lot. Or from, what we might normally say, well, these people are just crazy, right? And I'm sure, we all know that, you just kind of wipe it off. I've learned things about, I've come to the point where I don't disbelieve anything, which might sound strange. It's not that I actively believe in everything.
Right. Explain what that means.
So few weeks ago, we had a patient who had come in. She came in end stage COVID into our unit, and I see COVID patients. I think I sent you a picture of me and all of my
in all your
paraphernalia, right?
Yep.
And I see COVID patients. I'm a frontline healthcare worker. This is what I do. I went in, and she had just been taken off a ventilator in the ICU, and we had her on 15 liters of oxygen, which is a lot of oxygen unless you'd been on a vent with 60 liters prior. So she made the decision. She and her family made the decision. She did not want to be kept alive artificially. She wanted to let God do what God does. So whether that's get her up and walk away or let her die, either way, and that's what she wanted. So she came into our unit, and she was really having a hard time breathing. And as a result, she was quite agitated. Her heart was racing. Her breathing was really rapid. And we could tell that she wasn't getting the right amount of oxygen. So she had come into our unit. We gave her some meds. It still wasn't working. So the nurse went in. We got we ordered some new medications. And there was like a half hour, 45 minutes between the time that we placed that order with the pharmacy, even as a stat order in a very busy hospital in the city. It still took about a half hour, 40 minutes to get up to her. I sat with her that entire time, right? And because I didn't want her to be alone, but mostly I thought, let me see what I can do to help this breathing. And so I just started reading the book of John and some other passages from the Gospels. And she was a Christian woman. I didn't even know she was a Christian woman. It was a bigger assumption, but I'm pretty good at that. And so I sat there and I read and we prayed together. And, we asked Jesus for his help for her. And I did that through my mouth, but it was really the prayers for her, right? If I'd started praying in Hebrew, which might be more familiar with me, it wouldn't have done anything for her, at least from her hearing it. So, and I felt like I couldn't leave. I felt like compelled to be there. It's a feeling that I don't get all that often, but like a real internal drive where we usually max out and say we'll only be there for 15 to 20 minutes in a COVID room because then we can limit our own exposure. So after 15, 20 minutes, I got up and I walked out. I was covered in sweat because what we wear, we get covered in sweat. So I go out, take a breather. Her alarms start going off again 5 minutes later. I put everything back on and go back in and sit there for another 15 minutes. And we did pray. So that night she really declined rapidly. Her family came the next morning, and she died. So, okay, so that's a normal reality. That's part of what I do. But what was unique and where this belief concept comes in is that I was talking to the family afterwards. And I didn't tell, they knew that I went in there to calm her down. I didn't go into the details prior to them telling me the following. I said, tell me what kind of woman was your mother? And they would say, well, she was remarkably spiritual and such a strong believer. She said, we would not be able to see her, or we would, we'd be in the grocery store and she would disappear. And the next thing we know, we see her praying with somebody. And she did this all the time. She had people in her life who she just connected with in that moment and prayed. And that's what they did. And I'm like, holy cow, that's pretty powerful. So I told them the story of what happened. And they said, yeah, she believed in you.
So
that was, to me, that was like, that is a real powerful thing about, the power of humanity, the power of prayer, the power of this woman's faith, the power of what I do. And, the former Dan Rabishaw would have just written that off to, wow, that's pretty cool. And that's chance. Right. But the one that has seen 200, 300, 400 people die over the years believes that, maybe that was God's hand at work or something bigger.
So you told me before that before we got on the air that the Lord's Prayer in Spanish, and you talk about reading the book of John and praying with non-Jews to Jesus. So, and I know when I was a practicing Jew, that would have been very difficult, if not impossible for me. And now, as a Christian, obviously it's not. And I've taught my family somewhat about Judaism. So how do you, because I'm really interested in this and I respect it greatly. How do you pray the Lord's Prayer as a Jew, or even pray prayers to Jesus as a Jew in your role? Is it that you're just like going, okay, this is work? I mean,
No. Because for me, prayer is prayer. I don't care who it's addressed to. I don't care what the purpose of it is.
okay,
Anybody who speaks in a prayerful way speaks to God. Now,
okay,
you could define that what God means in any series of manners. I believe in one God. I believe there is one God. I believe that God is a part of all of us. I believe that we all have a spark of divinity within us. And so the words that we use to address God are words that we have ascribed to attempt to find meaning in something that we fundamentally cannot understand. Right?
okay,
That's what I believe prayer is. Prayer is our trying to figure out a way to communicate with a divine being that we just can barely comprehend. And so to me, the language is just language. It's words that we ascribe to, and we put a lot of meaning in those words. Some people put symbolic meaning in those words. A Christian is going to put symbolic meaning into the word Jesus, and not just the word, but the concept of the Christ and resurrection and dying for one's sins and all of those, right? All of that.
right,
I don't necessarily put all that in there. So to me, whether I'm praying to Allah, which is again just a word for God, or to Jesus, which for me is another word for God, it may not be how you look at that word, but for me, it's I'm helping this person get to where they need to be. And in that moment, it's not about me. But if I can become a vessel and I can become a mouthpiece, a la the way you pray, right? Right? Because you speak in a way that people may look from the outside and say, I don't get what the hell he's talking about. And I don't understand how that comes. And how can that be prayer? And I know that you probably have heard that before or
yeah.
felt that before. And people will look at me, I have colleagues who don't get it, and that's okay. But it's not about them. It's not about me. It's about the patient that I'm with.
That is
Does
amazing.
that make sense?
That makes great sense.
It's a very progressive.
You know what? I can't say I 100% agree with it, but it makes sense, and it's something for me to give thought to. I respect your position and your approach. And I just need to balance that, and I'm sure other people do too. So watch the replay, everybody, to hear what Danny said again. So shocking.
Again, it's the difference in my mind between religion and faith, and religion and spirituality. Religion is the construct. Religion is the structure that we pop ourselves into to try to help us understand, and that's the structure of our symbols, of our symbolic meaning, of our understanding of truth. Right? That's the religious aspect. Faith, to me, is, listen, I can be a faithful person. You can be a faithful person. We can come from different religions, but we can come together. And if I say, dear Lord, I'm saying one thing, you're hearing something that means something to you. And it doesn't matter that they're different because we're both here in faith. And so when I'm with a patient, if I utter words if I utter words that make sense to me, it's going to miss the mark for that other person. But
Right,
I know
absolutely.
that I can utter words that make sense to them. I can understand the bigger picture for me to help me do that in an authentic way as a Jew, and still feel like I'm doing justice to this patient. It's a big jump, and I can tell you, I've heard it from some of my colleagues. I can tell you that pretty clearly. But honestly, I think it's inauthentic to do anything else.
So let me ask you, although we've gone over, I got to ask the question. So your brother's a rabbi. Would he agree with you with what you just explained?
I would say mostly.
Okay.
I mean, again, I push it. Listen, we all have our boundaries, right? And I'm going to say this. This might sound very strange. All religion is hypocritical on a certain level, okay? Because faith is faith precisely because you can't prove it. Faith is faith precisely because it comes from here. And so, in a certain way, the minute you say, I am faithful to something, faith is not. It's different. It's a different emotion. So
faith is the substance of things
the only
hoped
difference
for,
between what
not seen.
I'm sorry.
Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Correct.
Hebrews 1.
Right? I'm a Cubs fan. Hello. Right? I said this actually once in a sermon. I said, listen, to me, the definition of faith is why, I'm a Cubs fan. If you were to lay out all of the facts prior to 2016, they would say, Danny, you should not be a Cubs fan. You should be an anything else fan, but not a Cubs fan, because the Cubs are going to break your heart every year. And I would say that may be the case, but I still believe. I still have faith despite evidence or logic to the contrary, right? And so that's why I said I don't disbelieve anything. I believe that you're going to heaven because of the path that you've chosen and the path that God has chosen for you in life. I believe I'm going to heaven because of the path that God has chosen for me and how I'm going to life. I'm not going to define what heaven is because it may be different. I'm not going to define God because I think our definitions of God, or at least understandings, may be different. But I think we can talk in those terms and come to a great deal of agreement. And so when I talk to Alan about it, do I push the boundary for him? Yeah, but I don't for me. And I'm never going to do something or say something that is counter to who I am. In fact, but I'll tell you, and I know that we're over, but one of my very early patients, I walked into a house in McHenry County, which for those of you who don't know is a very right-leaning county, not just politically, but religiously, everything. So, and there's some people out there who I had never been in contact with. I walk in, and there's a huge swastika on the wall, big flag. Okay, so here I am, a rabbi, but I didn't tell him I was a rabbi. I was a chaplain. I remember telling the story, and they're like, well, did you just turn around and walk out? I said, no, because my job was to be there to help this guy get from point A to point B. And so I went in, I held his hand, I prayed with him. I validated his feelings of loss in life. And I was there because I was a vessel to be in that place at that time. I walked out of there, and I sat in that driveway for like a good hour and just processed that whole experience. I basically came out with the fact that, listen, here was a man who was in need, and I was a man who was there to provide for that need. And I really had to step out of my own sense in order to make sense of that. I'm not a believer in cancel. I'm a believer in embrace. A lot of what happens in today's society is either if you don't agree with everything I stand for, then it's as if you agree with nothing.
Yes.
That's not me. It is terrible. And it's terrible on, by the way, on both ends of the spectrum. And I have the same issues with people on this side who believe that as I do with people on this side. I believe that I function more in the center. But again,
I've become more right-leaning. I've become a conservative over the years, but the extreme people on either side, I just don't get. I was having a conversation with someone a week ago about a business opportunity. And this individual said to me, she goes, "Oh, you would be my first conservative friend." And she's in her 50s. I would be her first conservative friend. Think about that, Dan.
Listen, the world I work in is not the monolith. And honestly, that's one of the reasons I left the synagogue. I mean, that might sound strange, but in the Jewish community, I felt it was a monolith, and that I did not feel, first of all, I tend to sit more towards the right anyways. And so I didn't feel totally at home in the ultra left-wing side of my people, in my party, in my religious community.
Right.
But the other thing is that, you know what? Everybody I saw was white. Everybody I saw was generally, moderately to well off. Everybody I saw was well educated, or had that capacity. Everybody I saw was, not a dyed-in-the-wool liberal, but certainly had lots of crunch beneath their Birkenstocks, and I'm okay with that. But that's not all there is in the world. And so I shifted my whole life because I wanted to work among real people. And the world is not a monolith. And I think we've all done ourselves a disservice by focusing only on those people who we agree with or that agree with us.
So in 3 sentences, 40 minutes, in 3 sentences, three sentences, send everyone off with your thoughts for the weekend.
Folks, we live in a crazy world, and our job is not to fix the crazy world. Our job is to work on our part of it. So go ahead, go into the world. There's a Yiddish expression, "B'makom she'en anashim hishtadel lihyot ish." In a place where no one is doing the right thing, if you strive to do the right thing, then you've made the world a better place. So go out and just do right. Lead by, not by saying this is what you should do regardless of what I do, but show people how it should be done. You'll make your world better. And the rest will follow, but we got to figure this out together. And that's the only way this is going to work. And that's why I do what I do. And that's why I'm so grateful that you brought me onto your show.
And I am grateful that you were my guest today. For everyone, I've been calling old friends in addition to new friends, but old friends. And
he couldn't find any friends, so he called me.
Yeah. And I can't wait to see you at the next fraternity reunion. And on that note, thank you, Danny. I'm signing off for the day from Litvak Leadership Live. We'll see you all Monday. Have a blessed day.